All right. Welcome to Introduction to Psychology. My name is Nathan Lynch. You probably already know that from the welcome video. I studied philosophy mainly, but as you'll find out very quickly, the job of psychology was done by philosophy until about 150 years ago. So it's a very young science that we're going to learn about. And since I studied philosophy, I want to give you the ancient background of psychology. And I don't just want to give you the ancient Western background in psychology. I want to give you the ancient background in psychology from this area as well. So sometimes there are going to be things that work in the Samkom class and that also work in the philosophy of science class. And you'll probably see a little bit of repeated content. And that just means that something is so good that it needs to be in everything. And so if any of these beginning lectures have similar slides, it's just because it's really easy to go back to the roots of human knowledge, the roots of asking questions, and you find that the beginning of all projects is the same. A PhD is a doctor of philosophy. And a philosophy used to include physics. It used to include biology. It used to include psychology. It used to include really everything that involved deep thinking. Because if you weren't doing deep thinking, you had a pointy stick and your job was to, go out and keep the enemy away or go hunt food, right? You had something that had to do with survival that you had to be doing all the time. We're very lucky that our whole job now as teachers and students is just to think. And human society has not had that for very long, right? We're pretty lucky, and our whole intellectual powers, they're actually very new. So in these classes, we're going to explore kind of the depth of them, and I won't go too ancient just because there's so much in psychology that is so awesome in the real world that we live in. So I'm going to try to fast forward through history really fast. So you're going to get a lot of slides coming at you really quick. Don't worry about writing everything down. You can always pause and hit a screenshot and come back and look at it later. But this stuff is just to, keep my talk on track and to hit you with some visuals. You're not expected to remember everything from here. Just wait until you find something that's interesting to you, and then pause the video and start writing what you think, and then maybe come back a little bit later, watch a little bit more of the video, think a little bit more, and then add a little bit more to your answer, right? The main thing that we're going to be doing every week is I'll lecture on the contents of the book. I got the real book. Bam, right? It's a hardbound book. It's pretty nice. I do so much work on the computer. I really like having an actual book, but it cost me like $1,800 or something to ship it from the US for a free textbook. I hope you're enjoying the free textbook. But yeah, we'll go into the book and I'll lecture on it. You just wait for your moment, and then you write what you care about, okay? So you write what you care about. That's the big thing here. And the thing that people sometimes get tripped up here is they will do some research online and end up copying some stuff offline. I know in the introduction video, I told you to never, ever, ever do that. I'm going to tell you again, don't copy anything off the internet. The reason is, for this lecture, you're supposed to just wait until you feel interest, you feel spark joy, you feel interest in a topic, and then you start writing, because this class is going to be more aimed towards what you care about, right? This is an elective. You're probably not going to become a psychologist. What you want to do is find something in this course that is going to help your life. Maybe it's going to help your career as a scientist. Maybe it's going to help your relationships. Maybe it's going to help you, answer the question of who you are in the world or whatever. Focus on that. Wait until you find something that you care about. If you find that you care about nothing, just relax and, eat a snack, have something to drink, just chill. If you have an instrument, you can play your instrument. If you have a fidget spinner, play with that, and you just wait. And then at some point, I'm going to say something, and you're going to be like, I don't agree with you. Bam, that's your thing. You start writing your words, right? That's what it's about. You have total freedom to write what you care about, and that's what we're going to do every time. Okay, without further ado, this section is called Know Yourself, and you're going to find out why really quickly. So psychology, in a lot of ways, we're going to get a lot of definitions. Of course, the real definition. The book gives you the real definition, but I think this is the real definition. It's the study of being a human. It really is. So psychology has a root that comes from the ancient Greek. It's like a translated word that you find in English. Psyche comes from suke in the ancient Greek, and it really meant soul. It didn't mean mind, right? Because they didn't know that the brain did what it did until much later. They thought emotions were in the heart. They thought all kinds of different things. And so the soul was that immortal ghost inside of you that thinks things, feels things. Ology comes from the logos, and the logos means like the word. And if you read the Christian Bible, you have that statement that says, in the beginning there was the word, and the word was good, and that's like the language was given to humans by God, so it's like this magical thing, the word, making sense of things with the word between people. And that's what the ancient Greeks were all about. Through the logos, we can argue together, and we can say, I like what you're saying about this, but I want to fight you back a little bit. Consider this, and they did fight back and forth to try to find the truth. That was the way of the ancient Greek philosophers. That's the way they did psychology. So if you look at the soul and the word, you get this idea that psychology is words about the human soul. Very beautiful, very poetic. The ancients could be like that, right? They weren't scientists yet. We're scientists now. We don't follow this stuff. Now we're scientists, and we say that psychology is the study of the human mind. Sometimes we'll even say it's the scientific study of the human mind, and sometimes we'll go even further and say it's the scientific study of the human mind based on empirical data. And we'll get more into that in the first 2 chapters of this book. Don't worry about writing those things down. They're just for you, okay? So know yourself. That's you're in university, right? You're supposed to find yourself. So this comes from the ancient Greek as well. This is autognosis, and autos means self, right? And gnosis means knowledge, and the gnosis, G-N-O-S, that root, you can find it in agnostic. And agnostic is a way that people describe their relationship to God or religion sometimes. I am agnostic. That means I don't have knowledge. There was a sect of the Christians that was the Gnostics it would look like. And that means they were trying to find knowledge, right? So the pursuit of knowledge is very hard, and the pursuit of self-knowledge is even harder, right? Okay, so let's come on over here. Meanwhile, in India, they had the Vedas, they had the Upanishads, they had Buddhism, they had Jainism. All of these, the Yoga Sutras, all of these were descriptions of the way that the mind works in the world, right? So psychology, you can read your psychology textbook and it's going to say psychology is 150 years old. No, it isn't. Psychology is as old as our history is. You read the oldest texts and you can find psychology in them, right? So one of the questions that you have if you're trying to know yourself is, what is the self? And you'll find that not everybody agrees. If you really go to the oldest texts, let me do this. Like these are back to ancient Greek. These are 2 of the oldest texts, right? This is the Iliad of Homer, and this is the Odyssey of Homer. I was at Kinokuniya. I got both of these for 68 baht. The Epic of Gilgamesh is older than both of these books, they think, but the Iliad and the Odyssey are older than books. They're ridiculously old. When the ancient Greeks were doing their thing, they called this ancient culture. This is ridiculously old. And a lot of people who study literature will tell you that, like, when you dig into these texts, you don't find really a mind Like it's not, the characters don't have this internal dialogue where they're making a decision. They just have kind of the will of the gods arriving in their mind, and then they're doing things. And there's an argument that that was what human experience was many, many thousands of years ago, was that we didn't have this long process of making a decision inside of our minds. I mean, think about what you do now. You're really talking to yourself in your head all the time, you know? So there's an argument that this literature suggests that people a few thousand years ago weren't even doing that, right? And that's a guess, right? The further back into history you go, you find you don't get to be very scientific about things, but it's an interesting idea, right? And so that idea tells you that the self is a different thing. Maybe you don't have free will and the will of the gods is being done through you, right? Well, a couple thousand years ago, around, before the year zero, a little bit after the year zero, like a couple thousand years, not 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, you started to get a change in what people think the self is, right? So in India, the Sanskrit language gives us a lot of words for it. The ahamkara is like the I am organ, and it's the idea of the ego, the false self. And all of Indian philosophy is going to recognize this kind of false self. It's the idea that you are your Instagram profile, and that all of Indian philosophy is going to tell you, no, you're not. You're something deeper and more beautiful than that. The default mode network is basically neuroimaging and neuroscience finding this ahamkara, this fake self, and they have located it in certain areas of the brain, and we don't need to know what they are right now. They're not going to be on some test. Just let this in. But the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex would be one of them. The ventral medial prefrontal cortex is another area that lights up. And then they seem to have connections with the posterior cingulate cortex. And these are things, don't worry about that. Don't write that down. These are things that turn on when we are thinking about ourselves, when we're looking at our, checking the amount of likes that we have or something. You start to have an experience of being a self that is not, it's usually not happy for people, right? And that the Buddhism is going to have a lot to say about that really soon. But what turns this off is really interesting. Now, you might obviously say what turns it off is something like meditation. Meditation turns this off. And they studied this by putting those nets onto the heads of meditating monks and finding that these areas would just turn off, and they found all these peaceful mind states in the monks that are meditating. But it's not just that. If you put one of those things on, it's an EEG, electroencephalogram. Encephalo means brain. But and gram means measurement. Instagram, instantly measuring you. If you put one of those on Ronaldo and watched him play football, the self would be gone, because just like in the ancient literature, you don't have somebody having this experience of being a self. You just have the will of the gods being done through them. If you have somebody who is being an artist, doing art, that person is not thinking, I am. They're in a flow state. And a flow state isn't slang. This is something that people study all the time, a flow state. And I know that you've felt this in your life. It's a moment where you're doing something that you love. Maybe it's just like telling jokes with your friends and laughing, and you just feel like the part of you that's you is just gone, and you're just in the moment, in the flow, right? And they find when they study flow states that this thing is gone. It turns off. The self is gone. So usually being a self and thinking me, that sort of thinking usually makes people very unhappy. And not thinking like that usually makes people quite happy, Okay, so this really matters for psychology, trust me. Okay. So what is the self, right? The Upanishads, and this is Hinduism, give us a notion of this. bear with me. I know some of you are also in the Sankhom class, and I want to connect everything. They give us a metaphor for the self in the Kata Upanishad. That's just pretty spooky. Here I have a better picture of it. And this is Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita. There's this idea that like the world that we're living in is a road. And you're going down that road, you're being in the world. And how do you get information from the world? You get it from the senses. So those senses are your horses. It's a metaphor, right? It's just like poetry. And then you have a rider, you have a charioteer, and the charioteer is driving it through the reins. You have logic. Logic is flowing through the senses. You have information coming in, and you have actions coming out. And you know that it's the morning, you usually get coffee. You go get in the car and get coffee, or you text line man and line man gets you coffee. You take very simple actions. When you finally get up to this charioteer, the charioteer is the wisdom, panya. And that wisdom is acting to try to make big decisions in your life. Should I change my major? Should I move to Switzerland? Should I, these are big, deep things, and you have to use your whole mind to think of it. It's not like getting coffee. So there's many, many, many words for mind in Sanskrit. So what I'm saying is the ancient people in India were very, very, very good psychologists. In the end here, this is a little bit religious, is the rider in the chariot is called the Atman, the soul, right? And that is a self that doesn't do anything. It's just kind of a recording device that makes experience possible. This is still psychological, but it becomes very religious and it becomes very philosophical. So we won't really go into detail about it, but because it starts to ask you questions of whether or not you believe in the soul. But you can see that the old way of doing psychology plus religion, plus philosophy, they were all really mixed together. And it's very difficult to know yourself without religion and without philosophy. It's very difficult to get those things out of there and just be very scientific about it. But if you take this class, the later lessons will give you a lot of paths for doing that, and they're really good paths. Like we've come up with a really good science for this that's not religious and really not philosophical anymore. Okay. So Indian philosophy gives us parts of the self, right? You have the senses, they're the indriyas, and so the Indians were studying perception. You have the mind, it's the manas, and the mind was just the simple logical scripts that we follow, and psychology studies that today. You have the higher intellect, which is the buddhi. We have a hard time studying this because it's so complex, but there are neuroscientists. I've been reading papers recently that are starting to figure these higher intellectual things out. And by the time you guys have kids, oh man, the ability to measure is going to be terrifying to you, I imagine. Okay, so soul, self, Atman, like I said, it's pretty religious and philosophical. But the break that I want to make for you that you might find interesting, since probably 90% of you at least grew up Buddhist, is that this Atman back here that kind of does nothing in Hinduism, that's the part that the Buddhists do not agree with, right? This, Atman. The Buddhists do not believe in Atman. They say anatta. Anatta, there is no self, right? Self-service and non-self-service, right? Instead, the Buddhists will tell you that there are 5 skandha, right? Hakan. And these are the words in English. You might know them better in the Pali, but I don't know Pali, I know Sanskrit. You have the Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, and Vijnana. And this is basically objects, including your body and the physical world, right? Vedana is the idea that you like it or you don't like it, or you're choi. Sanya are perceptions, categories, automatic thinking tools. And the thing that's interesting about sanya is that little tiny babies who are just born, they don't have any sanya yet. And one of the things that when you're looking at a very little baby, like somebody in your family has a baby, you go to the hospital to meet the baby, and the baby's just kind of looking around, and you look at the baby, and the baby's looking at your face, but the baby's eyes don't stop on your face because the baby does not recognize the face. The baby's just kind of like looking around at reality. It's just pure sense data pouring into the mind, right? And it's not being mediated by concepts. It can't say, this is a rectangle. Like my daughter is 2. I just taught her what a rectangle is. And I show her this and she's like, yeah, that is a rectangle shape, you know? So she starts to have words about it and she starts to have thoughts about it. Of course, she was able to recognize a face long before that. But when she was first born, her eyes would just track all over the place because she didn't get what a face was yet, right? Everything was just this blur of experience. The great psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan from France, he's dead now, but he called this the real, right? It's the real, it's reality. And babies see this, but we don't. We don't see the real. We see the symbolic. And of course, the symbolic is language. That makes sense. But it's also the shapes that we see. The fact that when I open my eyes in this room, I see that I'm in a room, right? I have a word for room. My mind can handle that. And so I have to use less processing power to understand that I'm in a room. I'm looking at this square right here, and I can represent this as a computer. I'm talking to a computer. I look at that green light on. That green light on means I'm recording, and I should probably start making sense to my students who are on the other side of it. So there are, 40 people watching the video right now. Can I think about all of your minds? You know, I can't. I can't represent all of your minds. I don't even know you yet, right? I mean, maybe some of you I know yet, but I don't even know you yet. So basically, I'm running a script in my mind that's just talk to a crowd of students, you know? Oh, well, I know how to do that, and I've been doing that for a little while, so I'm going to run that script, you know? When you first have a mind, a very raw mind, it doesn't have these scripts at all. It doesn't have these small concepts that reduce reality. Lacan would say, if we just opened the floodgates and we just let reality pour in, it would just sweep away the self, and one would be gone in this just complete and total chaos of reality. There are a lot of thinkers in psychology and philosophy, in the cognitive sciences, and they say that reality is something that we can't handle. And so in between rupa, which is the actual form, and vedana, how we feel about it, we place sanya. And sanya will reduce reality to something that we can handle, right? Like if you're playing a game and your graphics card can't quite handle the sick graphics of your game, you have to turn it down so that your rendering speed is a little bit, the mind is like that. It really is, you know. These computer metaphors used to bother me, but they're getting better as computers get better. Okay, and then Sankara is interesting because it's all thoughts and all emotions, and they are contained within consciousness. For the Buddhists, the consciousness is, I consciousness is sight consciousness, so all of sight is contained in that. There's auditory consciousness, there's a body consciousness, there's a smell consciousness, there's a taste consciousness, and of course, mano vijnana, the mind consciousness, full of objects of thought, you know, and that this is Buddhist psychology. It really is psychological. And it's 2,500 years old, and it's based on Hinduism, which is even older because everybody the Buddha converted was a Hindu, and they all had psychology too. So we've had psychology for a long time, but we have not had science for a long time. And what this book and this class is going to do, I'm gonna try to stay away from the Freud and the psychoanalysis. I'll tell you a lot about it because it's really beautiful. A lot of times I teach artists, and the artists get a lot out of the psychoanalytic stuff. If you are interested in it, you want to do projects about it, you want to do a presentation about it, I support you to do that. I'm very interested in it, but I will try to, for you engineers, be very scientific in the delivery, more scientific than in the past. Because I like psychoanalysis. I think it's interesting because Freud was such a philosopher, and that's my training. But we're going to be scientific in this. We're going to collect data. And so let's get out of history and get into the scientific world. Not yet, though. Okay. So these are the consciousnesses. I just told you those. Don't write this down. It's just a history. a deep history. And remember, this is the world. The senses see the world. This is logic, making very easy decisions based on scripts that you already have. And then this is the wise one who's making executive decisions. Sometimes we call this EF, executive function, and sometimes parents are worried about kids having low executive function because they can't control their emotions. We humans can't control our emotions, and it's a big job. Like the cerebral cortex, the self has a big job, and sometimes it's too much. Sometimes it's really hard. And that's why we need psychology. And then the Atman, if you're a Hindu, it exists. If you're a Buddhist, it doesn't exist. And if you're a psychologist, you may or may not care about that. So we're going to move on out of the realm of religion. We'll touch Christianity a little bit more on our way to the present, but only a little bit. Okay. So anatman, anatta, right? No self. For Buddhism, to know yourself is to know that there is no self. And seriously, the attempt to solve a lot of psychological problems in Buddhism is, usually involves asking somebody, in what way are you being possessive of this? In what way are you not letting go? In what way are you not recognizing impermanence? Why are you pretending that things are permanent? The psychological methods for training of the mind are very self-consistent and powerful. It really works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everybody. But it's powerful, and it doesn't work for everybody, especially in the Theravada path, because Theravada Buddhism is so hardcore, man. All right. So really, there is no self that is not subject to impermanence. That's kind of the anicca or anichang in Thai. Okay. So if there is no self, what is there? Well, the senses pour into consciousness, and the arbiter of all of this can be the Buddhi, the one who knows in the Pali. And this is something I got from Ajahn Subato. He's an English monk, English Thai Theravada monk who's living in Australia, teaching in Australia. And he always says, you have to access the one who knows. You need the one who knows, And newer trends in psychology try to give you this way of finding wisdom as a goal, like especially the humanistic psychologists. And that's a really interesting thing. If you want to run some kind of a comparative analysis between some of these ancient spiritual practices and newer humanistic psychology, that would be a really awesome project. I would support that for sure. Because the Buddhi, the one who knows. Okay, so let's get back to the West. Okay, the ancient Greeks, there are roots, but I'm going to skip all that, and we're going to move to Freud. Here's one more. This is the ancient wisdom tradition. One of my favorite ones is Stoicism, and it's still alive today. This is not an ancient Greek. This is Marcus Aurelius. He was the throned philosopher. He was out being a military commander in the Roman Empire. He still had time to write the book Meditations. There's an app you can get called The Daily Stoic. And Stoicism and Buddhism are like this. They get along really well together. There's an app you can get called The Daily Stoic. And it'll send you like a small text from some Stoic philosopher every day. And seriously, like it's super hardcore like Theravada Buddhism, but it'll make you smile. It's always really very wise. And this is a very simple way of viewing the world. So I'm going to give this to you because I can do it in like 3 slides. Here's the best one. The Stoics say you should think about things that matter, that you can control. There are things that you can control. You can go through and put all of your, Instagram photos into different albums, and you can go through and order all of your socks so that they are all facing the same way, and you can you can do a lot of different things. You can go and look up the Wikipedia page for tissue paper and find the history of tissue paper. You can control many things in your life. And there are also many things that matter. There's whether or not you get your work done for school. That really matters, And there's also the political situation in the United States. And, I don't like this politician. Okay. Can you control that? Can you control that politician? The answer for me is no. So should you be spending a lot of time focusing on what that politician says or does? Oh, I suppose if I'm a Stoic, no. Right. And this was very true for people who really hated Donald Trump while Donald Trump was president. He'd be in the news all day, every day. And when you ask an American or somebody else who's interested in American politics, you say, hey, what can you do about Donald Trump? Well, I guess I can wait for the next election and vote against him. Yeah, that's about it, right? So wait for the next election and vote against him then. I don't want to hear about it anymore because in a lot of ways, there's nothing you can do about it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be involved in politics, but it's a good example that tells you that it's not really that it's a sin to be here or it's a sin to be here. But when you look at a map like this, you realize how rarely we're really spending time in this place where we're really controlling something that really does matter. You can see this in business. Some of you guys are business majors, and some of you guys will go into business. A lot of the KMITL graduates who I meet out in the world become very successful in business. There's a thing called the 80-20 principle, and we won't talk about it. You might talk about it in a marketing class or something. And it basically says that 20% of the things that you focus on and try to make happen are going to have 80% of your results. And, they back that up. It's like a hashtag. It's a thesis. It's a thing to sell books, but it's very true. You probably hear also about Pareto distributions. It's a distribution where very, very few powerful things have a huge impact, but most things have no impact, right? And there are a lot of things that are Pareto distributions, and one of them, if you look at a company, you have 25 people in the company, well, something like 4 of the people in the company are making everything happen for the company, and 21 people are just kind of along for the ride, just getting not important stuff done. It's not true that everyone is equally important. It is in the humanistic sense where we want to give everybody human rights and everything, but that there's only one Elon Musk, and if he dies, we're not getting another one for many years. There's not other people like that. I'm not saying he's a nice guy, because he's not. He came here and he was insulting those guys who were trying to save the Muba, the little boys who were stuck in the cave. Elon. But that's a Pareto distribution, right? And life is like that too. There are very few things that you could be doing with your life right now that would be making your life awesome. Okay, let's keep going. So a Stoic computer is basically like this. I thought this was really funny. It says, find out more about your cookie settings so you can find out more information if you want, but really the only choices that you have is you can accept the cookie policy or you can manage it. And that's something that's true about stuff in Stoicism, where if you have a problem, you can either accept it or you can manage it. There's not an option to complain about it. Or feel like sad about it or something like that. Stoics are super hardcore. You either fix the problem or you accept it. Say, I can't fix that problem right now. Maybe I can later, but for now, I have to just live with it. Whatever. Changman, Okay. So this is another one that's interesting. And just focus on this right up here. You can take a picture of it if you like. I'm not going to stay on it for a long time. My thoughts and behavior are my responsibility, and other people's thoughts and behavior are their responsibility. If somebody doesn't like me, I don't have any control over that. So it is what it is, I can control what I say to that person. I can control what I do. But if somebody else doesn't like me, I can't make them like me. So this is my responsibility, that's your responsibility. Again, it's like super hardcore, right? So Marcus Aurelius was kind of the old school Stoic, and like nowadays, if you're a business person, this guy is kind of nice to listen to. His name is Jocko Willink, and he looks exactly like Thanos. He's become very successful as a like leadership coach for businesses and podcaster. If you follow him on Twitter, you'll see that he wakes up at 4:30 in the morning every day, and these are his his main ideas. Extreme Ownership was his first book, and he was able to do all of his leadership coaching just by answering everything with the same answer. And that's basically like, whatever this is my fault, therefore I'm going to do this. You know, that was like his answer to every single problem. If you're the leader, then everything is your fault, therefore I am going to do this. You know, and that was it. There's no excuses for anything. Everything that happens, if you're leading 20 people, everything that they do wrong is your fault, and it's because you didn't explain things well enough to them. The thing that's cool is it does give you ultimate responsibility. It does give you ultimate power, but the difficulty with it is that it's really hardcore, and not everybody is willing to step up and be super hardcore, right? So Theravada Buddhism is really hardcore. Stoicism is really hardcore. If you want to follow those life philosophies, they're really good for you if you're up to being really hardcore. Not everybody is. So, you know, we'll find some non-hardcore philosophies in here too. But he also says that you should interpret everything as good. If you're alive, your life is a gift. If you say, I just got fired from my job, good, I can get another job. Or like, you know, I just lost my relationship, good, you're single now, you have more time to do push-ups or something. You know, he's just super hardcore about everything, and like hardcore positive, like everything has to be positive. He also says, wake up at 4:30 in the morning and eat only steak. So they're just the most hardcore person I've ever known, right? There are many ancient philosophical systems, right? I mentioned a few. Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism. Yoga is not physical yoga, right? It's like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are they're like a manual for trying to separate the soul from matter, you know, and it's a very psychological process. Ancient Greek philosophy contains Platonism, Stoicism, Epicureanism, and all of these things have very specific ways to tell you to like live a good life. Eudaimonia meant like the good life in ancient Greek. Okay, so let's fast forward to the late 19th century. We've got this guy, Sigmund Freud. You've probably heard of him. The book only gives him a few paragraphs, but his idea was that unconscious forces are ruling us from beneath. We don't know that they're there. They're acting through us. And sometimes the unconscious becomes very dark and powerful like Thanos, and it starts doing things in our lives that are not good for us, and we don't know that they're happening. So having greater self-knowledge is the path to shining light into that darkness, and then the demons kind of run away. They don't go away forever, but their darkness area just gets smaller, and their power, their influence gets a little bit smaller because consciousness is growing, and the unconscious is kind of like being battled back. You know, it's one very simple way of looking at it. So the thing about Freud and culture in general is all of this was coming out of a Europe that didn't see the rest of the world as clearly as we see it now. So psychology in general is very focused on Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic ideals. And even the research is done on Westerners who are educated in industrialized nations, usually in cities. They're rich, and they are in democracies. And this is actually a very, very small percent of human beings who are alive right now are in this sort of a situation. And I would say that you guys at this school are actually closer to this mentality than most of the people in this country. But you know, you can fight me on that one, because I think like just even being at the level of English that you're at to understand a lecture this long, to read text that this is this difficult. Like you have to understand not just English, but like all of the Western cultural assumptions that come along with it. So in a lot of ways, we're getting this global culture that we're all kind of a part of. But this is still a huge bias. And I feel like Mark Zuckerberg at some point is going to like fix it all by just being like, hey, I studied 3 billion of you without your permission. My sample size is 3 billion. So now I have universal truth. Do you want to know what a human mind looks like? You have to pay me. So this is a little infographic. It's from a while back, but it's basically saying this. Before social media and before, you know, these like Qualtrics and Google Forms and everything like that. If I wanted to do some research on people, I was a graduate student and I was teaching an introductory psychology class. I would ask my students, okay, who needs extra credit? Some students would be like, to me? Be like, okay, stay after. I want to give you a survey. And then I'd give them a survey and be like, please be honest. And they'd be like, okay. And they'd fill out the survey, you know, thank you, bye, you know, and I'd take that. And that's how I would get information. It would be from Western undergraduate students. That was really it, you know. And so you see on this map that it's so Anglo. I mean, yeah, it does include a lot of Europe, but it's all Westerners, you know. And like we'll study Pavlov, and there were many great Russian and Soviet psychologists, but like there was a huge break at that point. So like basically the West was studying itself, and then the West comes out and says, hey, this is, I found universal truths about human beings. And it's like, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. You know, we're going to be a little careful about that because you've really only studied Westerners. You know, you guys are just studying yourselves. So that's part of why I started with the kind of like a multiplicity of ancient methods, because if you look, the ancient Greeks understood a lot of things, but if you're going to measure the ancient Greek psychological power against the ancient Indian psychological power, the Indian philosophy is far more intricate psychologically, and it leads to methods of saving yourself that are far more real. And yeah, it's religious, but it was better. It was just better, you know. And so that's of course my opinion, but I think I could back it up. So that's it. You know, you gotta be aware of biases. So we're gonna talk about cultural biases that have existed before. Going to talk about some cultural biases that it's in the text. We'll get to it, right? So a little bit more history here. The Europeans that were creating this were not super religious people. The psychologists kind of had to make a case that religion was failing to solve some of these problems, and we were wise to have a science that we could turn to in order to you know, just tell ourselves who we are. And when we do have some serious problems and our lives feel stuck, we want to have some paths that lead to something that are maybe not, you know, explicitly religious. Like we have this growing understanding of science, and we should use that growing understanding of science in order to take some of that territory. The thing is, it's a young science. It's like 150 years old. And the process of changing over from, you know, being a European Christian society to a, you know, like value neutral, I have no assumptions, I'm just curious about finding the truth. Getting to that place was a journey, right? And it wasn't made all at once. So there's a lot of ways in which the Christian soul, which is very different from the soul that we would find out here, made it into psychology. So the Christian soul, in case you don't know, is permanent. It's going somewhere else, like heaven or hell, and it's going there permanently. right? So the stakes of this life are very different if you don't believe in reincarnation. If you believe that you're only here once, and when you go to the next place, you're going to be there forever, right? And the two places are diametrically different, heaven and hell. You know, they're as different as you get, and you're not going to get out of there ever. So that's a very different belief system than what we have over here. Okay, so if you compare that to Buddhism, you know, these are obviously different cultural assumptions that are baked into the ancient philosophies that start these things off. So like psychological truths across cultures are going to be radically different. Okay. Souls, man, it's baked in there, you know. So when you look at Freud, as atheistic as he was trying to be, his philosophy is still very it still looks like souls are in there. Like he's still studying a soul. You know, a Buddhist would not have created that. Okay, so this idea of the ego, when you hear it in Freud, it just means self. But if you hear it in English, it usually means fake self or self-aggrandizement, or it's this puffed up version of self. And if you popped it, it would explode because it's all fake. It's just a big, you know, you're fluffing your fur up to try to look big. You're not really big, you know. So this whole thing did influence Freud, and Freud influenced all of Western culture. Freud was also influenced by Darwin. Darwin came up with evolution by natural selection. Look at that awesome beard. If I look up academicinfluence.com, academic influence. Oh, what are you doing to me? Give me a second here. This is a site I like. It's called academicinfluence.com, and you can pick people or schools. I always pick people because I think it's interesting. Number 1 would be Aristotle. Number 2 is Darwin. Okay. Number 3 is Plato, ancient Greek. Einstein gave us relativity. Isaac Newton gave us all physics before that. Marx gave us communism. Shakespeare is one of the greatest in literature, and so much has been based off of him. And then Freud is number 8, you know, in human thought of all time. So he's the highest ranked psychologist up there. So it's interesting because of his influence on all human minds. He's influential as a psychologist, but the thing that you'll find is he is not influential within academic psychology, though his legacy, psychoanalysis, right? His legacy, his school is still very influential, but his own ideas, being the first one, have been improved and refined by many followers for the past 100 years. And so his core ideas are still there, but like psychologists are not really like digging into the original texts of Sigmund Freud, looking for ways to help people in 2021. Some are, but it's not. He's not as popular as he used to be. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So he wanted to find a Darwinian way of studying the mind. You know, why does this creature build this? But why did it makes sense, because this is obviously for food, right? He's going to survive because he's able to catch food and use less energy doing it, you know, and it's a good strategy. So why does this creature build this? You know, and why does this creature look like this when it would be much easier to hide from crocodiles if you didn't look like this? And it's because he wants her, you know? This is the dude doing this. And why does he make these things? That makes you slower. It's harder to run away from a bear or a hunter. Everybody's real attracted to this. Everybody who wants to kill you is real attracted to this. But it's used to go to have insignificant fights with other males over mating, you know? So evolution by sexual selection is something that we also study. So what you'll find is most of the things that animals do they do in order to eat to survive or have have offspring. The 4 F's, right, is feeding, and that's finding food, fleeing, and that means getting away from things that want to kill and eat you, fighting, which is obviously doing violence and not having violence done to you, and then the 4th F is mating, and that's just the oldest dad joke in all of psychology, but that one is pretty obvious, right? So we can see these things in human culture, and there's a phrase in here that I'm going to bring up. I'll read it to you right now, just because it's the thing that I underlined so heavily. I'll bring it up again. Yeah, here we go. So it talks about evolutionary psychology. This is on page 21 of your book, and I'll bring this up again because it's just so powerful. Evolution by sexual selection, right? So the traits that we possess now evolved under environmental and social conditions far back in human history, and we have a poor understanding of what these conditions were. This makes predictions about what is adaptive for a behavior difficult. Behavioral traits need not be adaptive under current conditions, only under the conditions of the past when they evolved, about which we can only hypothesize. That's a little bit complex, but what it means is the minds that we have, the bodies that we have, were finished for the savannah before we took over the world. We're going to talk about that. If you read Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, he emphasizes the fact that we were insignificant animals very recently. And so recently that now our role as master of the planet is one that we were not evolved to take up. That's the story, is that we were supposed to be an insignificant ape was very worried about getting kicked out of our tribal group. So a lot of our anxieties, a lot of our depressions come from the fact that we evolved to fill a certain role, and we have far outgrown that role. And we evolved to fear certain dangers, and we have far evolved beyond those dangers. You don't need to dodge a lion. You don't need to worry about even anymore a tribal war. We're beyond so much of this stuff, but those fears still remain. We still have the same minds. The other thing that's difficult is we can do our best to figure out what societies of the past were like, and really every time somebody tries to do it authoritatively, they get ridiculed. There's a writer called Christopher Ryan. He was famous as an early guest on the Joe Rogan Experience, the Joe Rogan podcast, the biggest podcast in the world. So he wrote a book called Sex at Dawn, and he was basically saying that human beings were more like bonobos than chimpanzees, and that human beings would just share sexuality as a resource. We were not monogamous, and we were not worried about any of that stuff before agriculture, because we were just hunter-gatherers, right? And the idea of being worried about whether a kid is yours or not is ridiculous, because the small band of people would just raise all the kids together. So, we have kids. That I don't know if that's my kid or this is our kid, right? So we raised this kid together. And that was a pretty interesting book. I've read more criticism than praise for it, but it's interesting. It's an interesting way of saying, actually, we're supposed to be like this, and culture is oppressive. But when we get into agriculture, of course, and many people have made this argument, you live in a small town and you need to, the family unit is helpful because you need those kids to work your fields. Everybody says that agriculture sucks. The idea that human beings were running around with spears, camping, eating different stuff all the time. Sometimes you're a little hungry, but not as often as you'd think. Life expectancy is not super long, but you're always on the road. You're always seeing different stuff, and life is pretty good. And then you start agriculture, and we just sit down. What's for dinner? Rice. What's for dinner tomorrow? Rice. What's for dinner in 30 years? Rice. That's it. Like you're not eating a lot of different stuff, and also culture at that point becomes really oppressive. And some of these people are saying that we're just barely getting over having the culture for a couple thousand years of being farmers, and we were not actually made for that. And this new world that we're kind of waking up into that involves a lot of liberation is actually true. That's something that some people think. You can decide what you think as much as you want, but it's interesting. Okay, so Dawkins gave us this idea. I'm going to go right to him. That people are not selfish. Instead, genes are selfish. Genes are trying to get into the future. And one of the ways that we do this is by actually like defending each other. And the community has an evolution that's all its own. The community will try to survive. And that's why we make ethics, we make community, we make culture. Freud called all this the superego. It started to be internalized in the mind. And then the mind started to be an instrument that produced culture beyond the tribes that we came from. Because if you ask whether everything in the world is about passing genes on, you ask about why some of the greatest heroes of all times don't have any kids. Like Nikola Tesla didn't have any kids, and the Dalai Lama is not going to have any kids. And soldiers will go and run into battle knowing that they're going to die, but they're trying to die for a higher ideal. That's not a thing that evolution, if it was just going to try to get you to be good at finding food, running away from danger, killing other stuff that's trying to kill you, or, in order to get more food or more sex, and having lots of sex and having your babies get into the future. Human society evolved to be a lot more complex than that. We're not just after these four simple things. Michael Mansour is an interesting character because you guys probably saw in Captain America where Captain America gets picked because there's they throw like a fake grenade, and he looks around and sees that, there's a bunch of people around him, and he goes, well, either one of us is going to jump on this thing and then one of us dies and the rest of us live, or we're all going to die. I'm going to take one for the team. And so he jumped on the grenade, and then they were like, oh my God, that's exactly the virtue that we're looking for. This guy's going to be Captain America. And the thing that's funny is right before that movie came out, this guy was a Navy SEAL, and enemy grenade ended up in the hole, him and his buddies, and that was, he had 1 second to make that decision, and he made that decision. He's like, it's either we all die or I die. I'll take one for the team. So he jumped down there and took responsibility and died, and became very famous, and became really famous. This is a really terrible thing to say, but he was honored in that film, if only indirectly. But and there are a lot of people that talk about him all the time, and how that's like a very high. That's a self-sacrifice is this very high thing in our culture, in all cultures. Somebody who self-sacrifices is very high. Like, think about all of the anime that you watch. Like, when the main character dies to save everybody, you're like, oh my God, I love this main character who died to save everybody. Or like, maybe they don't die, but they're willing to die, and they march off towards death fearlessly. Like, that's something that we all love. Like, that's one of our highest ideals as human beings. And it's totally against evolution by natural selection, because if I run off to die to save everybody else, it means that humanity, by having these ideals, creates people who are willing to die for humanity. So since humanity, by creating these ideals and loving these ideals, creates people who are willing to die defending humanity, that means that humanity is optimizing itself for evolution, right? All right, let's keep going. this is that argument. And it comes from the book Sapiens. For a little while, I mean, it's just evolutionary theory and the history of humanity. But something like a little over 100,000 years ago, we were in sub-Saharan Africa. This is the Saharan desert. This is sub-Saharan Africa, which means south of the Sahara. And that's where we all came from, all of us. Native South Americans walked the furthest, right? And this is some of my family right here. Pretty far walkers. This used to be an ice bridge. You could walk across that with some woolly mammoths, right? So these are some really far walkers, right? There were Neanderthals up here. There were other species that we would share Homo with, Homo Neanderthals. There's also Homo erectus over here, and they just didn't have what it takes to conquer the world, and we did. There's some evidence of a war between us and the Neanderthals, and there's some evidence that we just kind of outcompeted them and drove them into extinction, but more serious historians suggest that it was kind of a violent overthrow, and Homo sapiens kind of successfully targeted the Neanderthals and made it happen, which is a bummer. But this map will show you that, like, the human organism, humanity as an entity, followed a path to global domination, and the individual humans are now inside of that system. So this is our range now. If you look up the range of the tiger, it's just like right around here. You look up the range of the gorilla, it's like right around here. You know, like look up the range of a bear, you know, that's just up here, and a panda is like real small. You look up the range of a human, we're everywhere. We're everywhere you want to be. That's a desert. That's a desert. That's a scary jungle. That right there is a desert. It's called Death Valley. You know, this is frozen tundra. This is frozen tundra. Everywhere you want to be, humans are. So the mind was created by evolution as well, right? And that is something that people say, oh, evolutionary psychology is this new thing. No, it isn't. Like, Freud is one of the OGs, and he believed in evolution. And William James was the first American psychologist. He believed in evolution. Everybody believed in evolution, and they had it in mind from the beginning, right? So what is evolutionary psychology? It's kind of hard to say, because it's hard to find psychology that is not evolutionary. It's just sometimes some forms of psychology will kind of lose track of certain things that are more true than we remember about humans. That laughter thing is funny. There was a neurosurgeon who had a girl's head opened up and pressed on something, and she started laughing. And you know, this is a lot of times, like when they open up a brain, they'll be like, okay, we got to do at least a few experiments. Would you sign off on that? And you know, people will say yes, because they do it in a way that's pretty safe. They'll touch this little electricity, and this girl is just like laughing so much, asking her, "What's so funny? You guys are so funny." And it's like, no, they're pressing the funny button, you know. So when Elon builds his interface with the brain, if you just want to laugh, just hit the laugh button. Oh man, I'm in a bad mood. Hold on. All right, cool. I'm in a better mood, you know. That's coming, you know. All right, let's back up and cover some of the basics. I'm going to pop open the text, and we'll go through this first chapter. All right, I'm in a PDF of the textbook, and you can find that on the syllabus, or you can find it in the Google Classroom. I actually got the book online. I'm stoked about that. Rice University has a thing called OpenStax, and they make really nice textbooks. And this one should be free for you. If you really just like holding a book in your hand, you can, and like writing in the book, seriously, just download a PDF and have one made here, you know, for very, very cheap. I ordered it just because, you know, I wanted to get her done. and I'm doing this as my professional job. If I was a student, I would probably get a PDF together and like have a book made. That's not hard to do here, and yours will probably even be more quality than mine, even though it's hardbound. I ended up paying about 1,800 baht to have it shipped here from the U.S. So it was kind of a decision made in the moment. All right, but this I have the PDF on continuous scroll right now. Here we go. Tools, view. I'm using preview. Continuous scroll. You can do it and it'll pop up on 2 pages or a single page. I don't like either of that. I like this, and then you can mark it up if you like. I like to highlight stuff sometimes. Where are we at? Like that. Okay, so this is gonna give us a little bit of a history of recent psychology, not as deep as I went before. This is going to give us the past 200 years maybe. And you may ask yourself, why is it interesting to go over this kind of long historical conversation? Why do we spend time with this? Why don't we just start in the future? And the reason you'll find, I think, when you read this chapter is that you look at the way that the early schools looked at things, and you see that people started to get sick of the lack of progress, and then there will be a small revolution where the behaviorists are only focusing on behavior. Or like, let's look at the beginning. Wilhelm Wundt and William James and Freud, they're all looking at the soul. They're all thinking about the depth of human consciousness. And the structuralists are trying to find the shape of consciousness, and they're trying to find methods of figuring it out. The functionalists are interested in what it does in the world, which is more my jam. And I like the first one too, but I don't think it's scientifically possible. And neither do you probably yet, but maybe Elon will make it possible. Oh, he's scary. Then the behaviorists are like, I'm tired of your hippie nonsense. We're going to only focus on what people do because we can measure that. If you tell me you feel sad, I don't know what your definition of sad is, so we're not going to think about any of that. I want to see what you do, and then the behaviorists were able to produce, very scientific experiments, because they're saying, hey, I'm measuring what these people do. You can see what they're doing, and I can see what they're doing. So that's empirical, right? And next, the cognitive psychologists come along. They say, hey, we're starting to get a little bit of tech. We can start to think about thinking again, and they're tired of the behaviorists. So you have this constant like flipping back and forth where whatever is strong for a little while, everybody starts to get tired of that because it's producing kind of the same results, and something new arises. It's almost like, I don't know, fashion. So like, this is a very young science, but when you look at all of it together, and you look at the whole conversation, you start to see a picture of how psychologists in 2021 are doing work, and what are the movements that have informed them. Artists are the same way. Scientists in general are the same way. They have to look at the whole history of what brought us here. Okay, so here we go. These are interesting. A Beautiful Mind was a really good book. There are a lot of really good psychology movies that'll be referenced here, but A Beautiful Mind is awesome. Okay, what is psychology? We went into that pretty deeply, and this is one of the things that you're starting to find is that more and more people are interested in empirical methods, and one of the things you'll find when you go to seek therapy is therapists are quick to tell you, hey, we do things that are based on evidence. We do evidence-based practice, and that's what we do. So there are a lot of experiments, a lot of papers that get written. This stuff gets evaluated, and then they say, does this therapy work for people who, are having these kinds of problems in their lives? And the answer better be yes, Okay. 'Cause that's the thing about a science, one genius may be able to make stuff happen, but that's loud. But we are stronger together. Okay, so why study psychology? I thought it was interesting that, Queen Amidala and Mark Zuckerberg are both Harvard psychologists, as is Jon Stewart. He's kind of the guy that brought us comedy news. And he just recently says he thinks that the coronavirus leaked from a lab. That's interesting. It's weird that people from the mainstream are saying that. It used to be just kind of a conspiracy theory. So yeah, it's trying to sell you the idea that psychology is good, but I think we already talked about that quite a little bit. So the recent history, this is the interesting stuff here. So we begin with Wilhelm Wundt and structuralism. So structuralism is trying to show us what is the mind, what is consciousness. The philosopher Daniel Dennett, who looks a lot like Santa Claus, wrote this book in the 90s called Consciousness Explained, which is pretty funny because everybody says that explaining consciousness is so impossible. And he goes, Consciousness Explained. It's a really amazing book. And if I would have kept cruising down that list of influential thinkers, he's very influential, Daniel Dennett. So Wundt had a similar kind of introspection sort of situation, and that's trying to perceive one's inner mind. And he thought that you could find the structure of the mind this way. And this is not very different from what they were doing in India long ago, in a lot of ways. But he was also the prefix Volk means the peoples, right? So that's kind of like the people's psychology here. And he thought that culture was really important. Where does it say this? It doesn't say that there. But he was saying that studying the human without studying culture is just absolute foolishness. And you really do need to study. Here it is. The study of culture was really important. So he's trying to develop structuralism, right? And was interested in focusing on the actual contents of mental processes rather than their function, solving the mystery of what's happening inside of the skull, right? And he was able to do a lot of empirical work as well. Like this right here is him measuring reaction time. And the psychoanalysts picked this up as well. They liked to have quantitative analysis of things. So they would say, if they're doing their free word associations, they would click a little timepiece to see how quickly people would answer things. And reaction time is something that is still studied now. Okay. Oh, and this is interesting. He says that as much as he tried to, that doesn't make it very easy to read, does it? As much as he tried to make things to explain this process of introspection to other people, it wasn't successful. And the early problems with studying consciousness were that you didn't have a lot of methods for just kind of getting into the inner experience of a human being. And that's still a problem for us now. So William James was Harvard psychology for a little while, but that was not psychology back then. He was a philosopher, an American pragmatist philosopher, and one of the best. But he was really awesome, and his jam was functionalism. I read a book by him called The Variety of Religious Experiences. That's a very powerful book. I did a lot of psychology of religion, and his work in that realm is really amazing about religious belief. So he was the first American psychologist. He's super interesting. And then you go to Freud, right? And Freud was talking about how many of his patients' problems arrive from the unconscious mind, right? The self that you cannot know. How am I not myself? It's from a film called I Heart Huckabees. You should see that. It's really awesome. So they recently made a Netflix series about young Freud that I haven't seen yet, but I might watch now that I'm teaching this class. But psychoanalytic theory, that was his jam, right? If you see psychoanalysis comes from Freud. Psychotherapy just means the talking cure, and it can be Freud's way or not Freud's way. But it just means you go in, you sit down and talk to somebody about what's going on in your life, and a lot of times they find that like the therapist doesn't need to say anything. You'll just talk your way into feeling better because you can see your problem. And Freud would say that you have this big dark demon that's showing up in the unconscious, and it's doing things in your life, making you say things that you regret, and making you miss out on opportunities you should have taken, and like controlling you. But when you really start to bring it into the light of the logos and speak about it, and you start to shine the light on it, and then it gets smaller. It's like, you're a little kid and you're afraid of the dark, and then you turn on the light and you find out, there was nothing there after all. Whatever monster it is not powerful anymore. That monster is not powerful during the day either, because the sun is lighting your house up. It's pretty much the same with talking. If you're able to really talk about what the problem is, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, this can fix your problem by itself without anybody giving you wise advice. So if you have friends who love you enough to listen to you talk about your problems, you should, always buy them dinner and take good care of them, because they're helping you solve the mysteries of your deep soul, right? So psychoanalytic theory basically said that the person's unconscious was the problem, right? He also said that most problems come from early childhood experiences, right? And like I said, many decades, Freud was psychology. And his best student was Carl Jung. I am a big fan of Carl Jung, Jung. He's definitely worth studying. He was ridiculously popular for a long, long time. And then very recently, just became very not popular. Most people don't pay any attention to Jung for the past, couple decades, but he was huge during his life. That Myers-Briggs personality theory, like INFJ, INFP, ENFJ, whatever, those personality tests come from his work. And he came up with the idea of the collective unconscious. And that's the unconscious that all human beings have before we even have any memories. It's the reason that certain stories will stick with us over other stories. It's the reason that Star Wars is successful. If you want to ask a question about how the collective unconscious and Star Wars are related, I will give you a nice long answer. It involves the work of Joseph Campbell. But this stuff, Freud was a teacher of Jung, and Jung was a teacher of Joseph Campbell. Not directly, but Joseph Campbell was very much a Jungian. And then George Lucas, who created Star Wars, read Joseph Campbell and followed all of his rules, which said, the human mind creates mythologies like this. The human mind is attracted to mythologies like this. So then he created a mythology like the one that the human mind is attracted to. Star Wars is wildly successful. And he says straight up that he followed this psychoanalytic approach to storytelling that you find in the work of Joseph Campbell. Pretty interesting. Okay. So we won't go deep into Freud. If you're interested in it, you're welcome to go deep in it by yourself. If you have questions about Freud, I'm happy to answer them. But we'll stay away from Freud a little bit this time. So Freud's ideas were very influential. That's totally true. You'll learn about him when we talk about lifespan development. Nobody really follows the Freudian model. That's not true. Some people do, but there are much better ones. It's just people always make fun of Papa Freud for his ideas of how little people become adults, but the idea that he wasn't, his ideas were not perfect, but they were better than the zero ideas that existed. And then Jean Piaget came on. His ideas were better because they were just cognitive. And then Erikson came along with his existential way of seeing things, and that was better too. So they're just Lawrence Kohlberg will give us a way of looking at morality, you know, that they're better than Freud's psychosexual stages. But Freud was existing in a world where everybody was afraid to talk about sex, and Freud was not afraid to talk about sex. And as usually occurs in culture, everybody is really conservative and tight and afraid to talk about sex. And then along comes Freud, and he's like, well, Darwin, sexual selection, obviously everything we do because of sex. We do it because we're thinking about sex. Everybody who is here in this digital classroom space right now is here because our parents had sex. You know, all of us are here because of that. But we all pretend that that's not what's going on, you know, even still. And even back then in his time, like, everybody was very conservative. So he kind of jumped over the fence, started talking about sex, and everyone's like, oh, goodness gracious. He's like, well, I'm already over here, so I guess I got to stay over here. And Jung, his best student, Jung was, you know, trying to say, okay, maybe we went too far over here, and there are some things that are, you know, not just about sex. Maybe we're more complicated than that. There are some things that we've created in culture, and maybe when we say it's a god, it really is a god, and it's not just an angry father, or a you know, an idealized mother. Like, maybe it really is a god, you know. So he took religion seriously. And many of the people, like Freud also gets a lot of garbage for being patriarchal, and that's true, you know, because people would ask Freud, okay, I understand your Oedipus complex, where, you know, this little boy decides that he's afraid of his father and he wants to possess his mother. I get where you're coming from, and I'm familiar with the ancient Greek myth, but what about little girls? What do they grow up like? Oh, it's the same but different. Can you elaborate on that? No. You know, he didn't have very good way of describing the life of little girls growing up and becoming women. He didn't do a very good job with that. He did a lot, you know. But luckily, there were many incredible female psychoanalysts that did a lot of that work for him that are not in the book. Like Julia Kristeva was, she's more of an artist psychologist, but her work was amazing. And like also Luce Irigaray, they were French feminists that were hanging out with Jacques Lacan. Object relations theory is Melanie Klein. She's not mentioned in here either, but there were many psychologists that came after him who really did a lot of the work of cleaning up his theory. And so you'll hear a lot of feminists say that Freud's way of explaining you know, the life of a little girl growing up to be a woman is very inadequate. And that's true, you know. But if you look at a lot of the female students of Freud, they really cleaned up his work. And like somebody like Melanie Klein would be able to answer that question a lot better than Papa Freud would. Okay. So a lot of his ideas are controversial, of course, you know, but some people say that, like, you know, they look at his older ideas and they don't look at his later writings, and his later writings do get better and better and better because he's just arguing with people all day, every day, and then slowly saying, oh, I guess, you know, I do need to clean this up a little bit. Let me add something to it. Maybe, does this make more sense? So Freud was constantly in conversation with all of these other people around him. It's widely considered that he did not have a happy life, but he's definitely given a lot to culture. Okay, so yeah, and his personality theory is also not very impressive, but he's you know, he's Papa Freud. Okay, moving on. Gestalt psychology is very interesting because, of course, there's always a movement that goes this way, and then there's a movement that corrects it. So as Freud is breaking things up into the id, the ego, and the superego, and that respectively means the id is the part that wants, you know, to fight and run away and eat and have sex, and it doesn't care when it does it. It doesn't care if it's daytime or nighttime. It just wants the things that it wants right now. And then the superego is the the thing that creates culture, the thing that allows humans to exist in culture. It's like the angel on your shoulder, and then the id is the devil. And then the feeling of self is the ego. That's the self being in the middle of all of it. And so Freud was into breaking things up into pieces. The structuralists were doing the same things. And then the Gestalt psychologists would say, you're not thinking about the whole. And, Buddhist phenomenology will tell you that there's eye consciousness and ear consciousness and mind consciousness, and they're not really occurring simultaneously. They're digital. They're broken into little pieces. But the Gestalt psychologists say what we are reacting to when we look at life, we're reacting to a whole. My kid, sometimes there will be a fan blowing on her, and it'll blow her hair into her eyes, and she's very irritated because what she's feeling is a hair on her eye, and somebody will be talking to her, and then she'll be like, what, and she'll be irritated by the person that she's talking to, but what she's not recognizing is the thing that's annoying her is the fan that's blowing on her. And that's something that is true of human beings. It's like, oh, well, I'm being annoyed by this, and now I'm being mean to you for no reason. It's because the whole of my existence contains being annoyed by this and also processing you listening to this. This is the whole of my experience all happening at once, and it's too much right now. Experience is too much. The whole together is too much, right? And that's true of a lot of other things. If you're hot and sweaty and you're getting bit by insects and you're waiting in line and something and somebody's talking to you and you're, what? I don't know what you're saying, and that person is like, why are you so impatient with me? And, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not being impatient with you. I'm hungry. I'm getting bit by insects. I'm hot and I'm annoyed, that's the whole of my existence. So that's what being a human is, quite obviously, right? This seems so obvious, but when you start to break down experience into these research questions, the Gestalt psychologists were finding that, people were very much missing this, and they were focusing on little tiny elements when they should have been focusing on the whole. All right. So in come the behaviorists. The behaviorists are like, all right, nice psychology, you bunch of hippies. I like what you're doing, but you guys need to bring it back down to earth a little bit. So they started to focus on behaviorism. We'll have a whole section on this, but the behaviorists basically wanted a situation that was straight up scientific. It could be measured. It could be seen from people by the outside, and it could be dealt with empirically, right? So Skinner was the next. Pavlov came up with classical conditioning. Skinner is kind of the godfather of operant conditioning, and of course we'll talk about this later. And behaviorism was very successful because it was able to produce observable empirical results, and a lot of these things lend themselves to quantitative powers. And as soon as you have quantitative information, you can apply mathematics. And when you can apply mathematics to large sample sizes, you can make a lot of very big claims about things, and you can, you can take your science to the next level. Maslow and Rogers were irritated by all of this behaviorism. And the behaviorists were making these big claims like, humans are a blank slate. John Locke said this long ago. Steven Pinker has a book that argues against this very, very well. Steven Pinker is Harvard psychology. He's definitely a genius, and he writes very well. His book Blank Slate deals with this, but the behaviorists really thought, you give me anybody, I'll make them a doctor. You give me anyone, I'll make them a serial killer. They thought that it was all nurture and no nature, which is not true. There's an interplay with them that's really important. And so these guys are focused on the parts. And of course, the humanists come along and they say, you need to focus on the whole, not the parts. So humanism had a bunch of really interesting contributions that we'll look at. Some of the things they didn't like the reductionism, the simplifying nature, and they saw things as overly determined and that's not good. They like free will, right? They don't like the idea that it's either nature or nurture and you don't have any free will. They like free will, right? So there's a couple of really interesting things that show up here. One of them would be like the hierarchy of human needs. This is really famous. Everybody's seen it. We're going to look at it in a second here. It's right here. There's a cat that has a podcast called the Psychology Podcast. His name is Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, and he's a Maslow scholar. He recently wrote a book called Transcend, and he reimagines the Maslow's hierarchy of need as a sailboat. And these lower three are like the body of the boat. If there's a hole in your boat, you really need to fix those first. And so like you need to have food, shelter, you need to have a little bit of money to know that you're going to be able to get these things and like do what you want. And you also need to have some social bonds. But then these, he was saying that they're not just part of the pyramid, that they're the sail. So once you get these three things happening for you, you can open up the sail, and the sail will let you move through the water to where you want to go. That's a really nice metaphor, I thought. And one of the other things that was in here is, where's unconditional positive regard? That's really interesting. I think that's in the next part here. We're going to talk about Rogers. Yeah. So he was talking about client-centered therapy. This is very psychoanalytic. The psychoanalytic approach, the doctor is very, very, very important, and the relationship between the doctor and the patient is very important. But for Carl Rogers, he was like, we need to get away from that. Just focus on the person that's coming in with a problem and focus on trying to solve their problem. We, the givers of care, we are not so important. And this is the way that teachers work too now. So we want to try to focus on the student and what does the student lead. Let's make this about your life, not about like what I feel like saying or what I'm interested in. So Rogers did this thing that's really interesting, and that was unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy. And we'll learn really quick that like there's a percentage of people who don't care about other human beings, and they want to kill other people, they want to hurt other people, and they derive pleasure from that. There are people like that, and you're probably not one of them, and you probably don't know people like that, but they exist, and there are a lot of them. And once you get into clinical work, you meet people, and you find out what they've done in their life, and you find out what they want to continue to do. And a lot of these things are dark, really dark. And the thing that's wild to me is that these committed humanist psychologists would remain committed to giving unconditional positive regard. Like, being like, hey, you still have the capacity to be a good person. There's a film by M. Night Shyamalan called Split, S-P-L-I-T, and that was a pretty famous film. I don't recommend it because it's just really, really disturbing. But there's a psychologist in that film, and there's a lot of times where she's meeting with the main character, and the way that she is warm and accepting and wonderful towards him, while he's kidnapped these girls, and he's got problems. She's wonderful. And like the moment I saw this unconditional positive regard, it immediately reminded me of this character in the show. And it's really powerful. And you can see that, like, well, I don't want to spoil it. But Split, I'll give you a warning, is that's a really, really, really heavy film. It turned into like a superhero series with Bruce Willis, and like, I don't know what the heck they were doing, but it's that movie was dark, very dark. Okay, so let's move on. The cognitive revolution. So after a little while, just behaviorism gets old. They don't want to talk about behaviorism all the time anymore. And they want to say, hey, we want to study thinking. We have some tools that we didn't have anymore, that we didn't used to have. And then we can scientifically study thinking. And of course, behaviorism said, you tell me you think this or that, that's fine. All I hear is language coming out of you, and I don't know what's really in your mind. And cognitive psychology started to come around and say, this is, you can call it cognitive science, the cognitive revolution. People started to say, yes, we can study thinking. Yes, we can. And here's what we've learned. And one of the most interesting ones that we've learned is about cognitive biases. So cognitive biases are very interesting. And you can look at the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Amos is dead now. Kahneman is old, but they're both geniuses. And Thinking Fast and Slow is a book that's very easy to read, and it will show you cognitive biases that are like, they're like mental illnesses that all humans have. You know, something like the planning fallacy. Like, oh, I'll get this video done in an hour and a half, and look at this. It's already an hour and 35 minutes, right? And I'm not all the way through the chapter. How about I finish the chapter, we get up around 2 hours, and then when we meet in class, I'll give you a little bit of time off, because I want to respect your time too. So stick with me for a little while longer, and we'll meet in class. Okay. So European psychology and American psychology were at loggerheads sometimes. They were in conflict, but mostly the West is quite unified. Okay, let's move. This is interesting. Feminist psychology, like feminism does not come from psychology. Feminism is a meta movement. It's like a philosophical movement that will get into literary criticism, or get into politics, or get into now psychology. And we talked about a little bit contributions of women, but from this point on, you start to learn a lot of stuff. But they didn't mention Naomi Klein, Melanie Klein, I'm sorry, Julia Kristeva. There are many amazing female psychologists, and nowadays there are female psychologists who are making tremendous contributions. We talk about culture a little bit down here, and this is part of kind of an American movement to make sure that you're mentioning the names of people who are from different cultures, and that's just where American politics is right now. They think that's really important. I like seeing it because I'm American, but the way that it's being delivered to you might not be. If you realize that it's an American text, you'll understand culturally that this is the current American political scene. My favorite definition of how to use culture properly would either come from Barbara Rogoff in the 90s. She would say that culture is something that's powerful and cannot be ignored. Recently, Lisa Feldman Barrett put it very succinctly. She's a brilliant Canadian psychologist. And she said something like, if one culture thinks something, and other cultures don't agree, then the truth level is, maybe it's not that great. But like, if people from many different cultures, you have cultural assumptions. Like, I have my American cultural assumptions that, you must do your own individual work. You can't copy anything from the internet. You can't copy anything from another student. This is the most important thing in the world. Maybe that's very American of me. Or like, every one of you is equal. Like, I really believe that in my heart, and that's very American. Like, democracy is good. That's very American. Whatever. People who make their own music or deserve more respect. Meritocracy. That the smart people should be the ones who rule the world and stuff. These are like, even though we picked a dumb president, this is, and we usually do. This is like American ideals, but they are cultural assumptions. So one of the things that Lisa Feldman Barrett said that's really good is that, like, if multiple cultures come to the same conclusion, you can decide that is right. More right. It's more right because we all think that. And one of the things that's scary about, like, cultures going away from the world, like if we lose some other cultures and we just have one culture, our access to truth is a little bit less good, I think, because you don't have those arguments anymore. Kind of need a bunch of diverse people who are arguing with one another and giving you different takes on reality. Like that's a good way to learn. And if we start to lose the differences between people, if we silence a lot of people, or like one culture comes to dominate the whole planet, we might lose wisdom. Okay, let's keep going. So we started this. This is very interesting. Go through it. It's good. Contemporary psychology. I just want to touch on some of these. The APA is the biggest, and they have this citation language that psychologists are supposed to use. Other disciplines also use APA, and they are, they certify people. Most of the best psychology programs are in the United States. I think there only is 1 or 2 PhD granting institutions in Thailand, and I think it's Assumption and Chula. But the guys from Chula I talked to, I asked them if they give PhDs, and his response was, yeah, like not really confident. So these are interesting associations. Here we go. So evolutionary biopsychology and evolutionary psychology, as our sciences have become more powerful, psychology wants to use these other sciences that have become more powerful in order to enhance its ability. So what you start to get is more interdisciplinarity, right? Interdisciplinary just means I know you're a biologist and you study drug effects, and I'm a psychologist and I study the soul, the human soul, but I want to know how drugs affect the human soul. So we're going to need to get so close together that we become a new discipline. Biopsychology would be that. Evolutionary psychology, I have a hard time talking about because it's like non-evolutionary psychology is kind of silly. You can fight me on that, but I think non-evolutionary psychology would be silly. So like most psychology is evolutionary. Everybody's down with Papa Darwin. This is the central nervous system. This is the peripheral nervous system. I'm not sure why they're showing you this and not showing you the endocrine system, which is all of the glands that release all of the hormones. That's almost more powerful for psychological study. Okay, so they study sleep. They study all kinds of very important things. Moving on to sensation and perception, this is something that there's a lot of study of. This is, my buddy has a coffee company called Duck Rabbit, and this is interesting because you can see the duck and you can see the rabbit, but you can't see the duck and the rabbit at the same time. And this is the realm in this sensation and perception, and then also the cognitive psychology is where you get books like Thinking Fast and Slow that'll show you kind of the ways that all humans are always wrong. One of which being, like I said before, the planning fallacy, where I say, this video, I'm going to rip through it in an hour and a half, but really it takes me a little bit longer than I expected, So that's the planning fallacy. Another one would be like self-serving biases, like, if I slip and fall, I'm like, oh, who put this water there? Anybody would have slipped and fell. And then if somebody else slips and falls in the same place, then I think, oh, you're so clumsy, So there's a lot of situations where you expect when something happens to you, you realize, oh, I couldn't help that. I was a victim of circumstances. But when something happens to somebody else, you're like, oh, you're a bad person who did a bad thing on purpose. Why did you do that? And that's normally, that's how a human mind is set up, is that we think when other people do things, they're a bad person who did something on purpose. And when we do things that are bad, maybe you think, oh, well, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. I didn't mean to do that, So that's just a way that all human minds are set up, or most human minds are set up to think about most things. And developmental psychology has gotten much better since Freud, and this is Jean Piaget. We'll definitely talk about him. We'll definitely talk about developmental because it's super interesting. And some of these theorists have gone beyond the idea that like when you're 20, you're an adult, and then you're just done. And they've continued to study developmental states beyond there, and because they do happen and you can see them. Like being a really old person, you can't be a really old person the same way you can be a 22-year-old. It's just a totally different situation. So they have studied the cognitive, existential, and moral maturity of older people, and that's a growing field because, like, you know, you guys probably know this from your engineering is when they look at the market, they're like, yo, we have like more old people, like way more old people. So you guys need to build some robots to hang out with them. And you're going to need psychologists to tell the robots what they're going to say. Okay. Personality psychology, we will take a personality test in this class because they're so fun. I mean, maybe they're not fun for you, but like a lot of people like to have self-knowledge, and I like to try to give you as much self-knowledge as possible. So we will definitely take personality tests. They're really fun. I like the Myers-Briggs, but the Myers-Briggs is not super scientific. The one that is super scientific is called the Big Five, or the 5-factor model, and those traits are right here. It spells ocean. Openness to experience, if you have a very high level of that, like I do. If like some alien came through a portal right now and said, let's go. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, you're done here. We got to move you to another station. Wait, no, I mean, you got too deep in your deep cover role, man. We got to get out of here. This is all an illusion. I'd be like, well, all right, you know, and it would make some sense to me. Openness to experience basically is, it's a problem when you have it up too much, but it's the idea that, like, if reality was really different than what you expected it to be, you'd be like, well, I mean, I guess that's surprising, but I'm on board with that. And people who are not open to experience are people who, like, you know, you tell grandpa that gay people exist, and no, they're pretending. That can't be true, you know. Conscientiousness just means you get your stuff done, straight up. Extroversion means you are comfortable going out, putting yourself out there, striking up conversations with strangers, being the center of attention, having a microphone and being on stage, dancing in public, telling jokes to people and stuff. These are all extrovert stuff. Assertiveness is one of them. You have a problem and you say, hey, I have to talk to you about this problem that I have. Agreeableness is a thing where everybody wants to go eat somtam. You want to go eat pizza. Everybody really wants to go eat somtam. You really want to go eat pizza. 5 other people want to go eat somtam. And you're like, I just had it yesterday, but you know, I want everybody to be happy, so I'll go with it. I'll go along with it. And then you'll eat somtam and you'll enjoy it. And you're like, I'm gonna eat this with my friends and I'm gonna enjoy it. That's cool. This is not what I want, but I can take one for the team every now and again. Neuroticism is the tendency to have kind of like normal stuff happen to you in life and be very, very hurt by it. So like, if people say things to you and maybe they don't mean to hurt your feelings, but they end up hurting your feelings anyway, that usually indicates neuroticism. Or like if you're under some stress and that stress starts to make you really angry, but it's not like a ridiculous amount of stress. It's not like an invading army has taken over your house and is, you know, like imprisoned your family or something like that. It's like a normal amount of stress, like you got to get your homework done and you're a little bit hungry at the same time, and like it's like the settings that make you upset are turned up a lot. So when a little bit of stress comes in, it will make a big fire in your house that you have to work hard to put out. And there are evolutionary reasons for this. They will probably protect against things like pandemics or great calamities or something like that when there are people who are worrying. But a lot of people who score high in neuroticism want to find ways to mitigate this sort of a thing. So it's not a mental disorder or anything, but it's like a tendency to feel unhappy when like normal stuff in life is happening. That normal stuff in life really hits you hard, and a lot of people don't love that trait about themselves, and they try to find ways of fixing it. And things like positive psychology that we'll look at help people deal with that kind of stuff. Because there's some people who are just super happy all the time for no good reason, and that's a wonderful blessing to have. And then there are some people who are, very anxious and depressed and not feeling great all the time. And it's a challenge that people face, and then they have to find a way to manage that kind of thing. Okay, so that's personality. And these ones are scientific. They stick with you over time. But the Myers-Briggs one is not scientific, but it's fun. It's really fun. And they'll also give you a bunch of careers, like, oh, you should do this career. This career would be really good for you. And when I took the test, I looked at it, and all of the careers on there were ones that I should do. Okay, so social psychology is different from sociology because it focuses on the individuals who are in society rather than focusing on society. Sociology being the study of the social in and of itself, not studying individuals so much, but studying societies. Milgram is amazing. If you didn't read this, read this. We will talk about Milgram. He's amazing. You couldn't do what he did now. Here's his, we'll talk about it. He did a thing, they had Holocaust Nazis on trial, and the Nazis were saying, they're like, why did you torture these people? And the Nazis said, well, they ordered me to do it. And people, how could you have done that? Well, they ordered me to do it. They told I didn't have a choice. Well, I would have left. I would have never done that. You're a bad person. So Milgram was interested in this, and he put out this thing, and he said, hey, we want normal people. Just normal workers, like bank people, sales people, business people, we want normal people. Just all the people we can get. And they studied a bunch of people. They brought them into a lab, and they tried to see if they could get them to torture somebody. And spoiler alert, they were able to get 2/3 of the people they brought in to deliver what they thought were lethal electric shocks to somebody. Nobody really got hurt. The person was acting. But this experiment was done so many times. It was replicated many, 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 many times. Basically just by being a person in a lab coat saying, I need you to shock this person. Just go ahead and do it. Yep. They weren't forcing them. They weren't doing it. They were just standing there looking like authority. These people would, torture somebody. And sometimes the actor would scream and cry, please stop, you're hurting me. But, well, this is for science. We're learning. Just this is about us. And, just go ahead. He's going to be all right, And 2/3 of the people tortured the person. So it's pretty dark, man. It's pretty dark. Industrial organizational psychology, these people get paid really well. They go into a business like Facebook, and they're like, well, Facebook, you have your office set up so everybody can see everybody's computer at all the time because this is what's trendy. The new research that's coming out says that people actually don't like this because they think that you don't trust them if you're putting them out in the open. People actually like having their own offices and having their own space. If you're going to be paying them a few $1 million a year, you should also be trusting them. Yes, give them access to each other and give them access to common areas and such, but give them their space to work. I'm totally making this up. But this is the kind of thing an industrial organizational psychologist would say. They'd say, Mark Zuckerberg, you think that this is going to make you more money. You think this is going to make your workers more productive. But actually, we've done some research, and this kind of worker usually has this kind of personality, and usually they like this kind of thing. So if you set up your office like this, you're going to make more money. And then Mark changes the way the office is set up. Sure enough, he makes more money, pays the organizational industrial psychologist, and moves on with his life. We'll probably look at James Clear. He's an IO. We'll probably look at BJ Fogg. He's also an IO. Health psychology is a really good thing, trying to help people. This model is really good to screenshot, and it basically says it's a little better than nature nurture. That nature being saying you have this kind of personality because your genetics, your genes have made you this way. And a lot of those things are true, right? Or they say, you have this personality because you had parents who brought you up like this. You had aunts and uncles in your life who brought you up like this. That's why you're like this, So it's nature and nurture. But they've split it into three. It's a little bit more scientific, a little bit more comprehensive. You have the biological, which would be your genes and hormones that are going on. Like people hit puberty, and then there are biological changes that happen in them. People get on drugs, and there are biological changes that are happening. So this is not just genetics, it's also all of the chemicals that are in you all the time. There's psychological, and that means like the states that are happening in your mind, and it could be about the interactions that you have in your life, but it's the thing that your inner world feels like is the psychological parts. And then you have the social, and that would be your relationships. Do you have good relationships? Are there people who you can talk to about your problems? Okay. So sport and exercise psychology, you can make a lot of money doing this. And this is really interesting to me. They started to find out that there are mental and physical performance capabilities for people who are under demanding conditions, like fighting fires, military operations, artistic performance, and surgery. And I didn't think about this. This is very interesting. But surgery is something where somebody's going to go in, they're going to put this person on drugs, and you're going to rip open their chest, and you're going to put something in their heart. You're the doctor who's going to do that. Did you have your coffee before that? And do you have a ritual that you go through before you do this? And one of the things that's interesting is if you have NBA teams and champion fighters and everything, you'll have psychologists who will figure out a way to make these people better, make them stronger, make them more, I don't know how to put it, make them more ready to do the very, very intense thing that they're about to do. And people will listen to music to get them ready. Just think about a test, right? Maybe you have some things that you do before the test to get yourself ready. Well, if psychologists were to study this, they could give you some procedures to follow. And if you followed them, you would do better. Well, think about surgery, This is somebody who's going in there. If they slip, they're killing somebody. And that's a big responsibility. So I thought a lot about, sports psychologists. Like, okay, that makes sense. You're getting these people ready to play a game. But the same principles could work for somebody who's going in to cut somebody's heart open. It's like, well, are you really ready to do this? What do you do to get ready to do this? I don't think that's a standardized practice, And it should be. All right. So clinical psychology is the one where you train to help people with their problems. And there's the school I'm looking at right now follows the clinical science model, and that basically means that you should be helping people all the time, and you should also be doing research all the time. And that's so firsthand, this is how the research gets done, and this is how it goes into helping people, because I know how to help people. And then these people will also teach classes and train graduate students and stuff, and that's what you do at the university level. But at the hospital level, you have somebody who's doing research, helping people, right? Okay, so that's clinical psychologists, and that's a very difficult program to get into, and it's a very long, tough training process. All right. So this is kind of the CBT model here, and it looks very much like what you've probably heard if you study Buddhism. You have body, speech, and mind, right? What do you do with your actions and your mind? But this here is if you are thinking things, those thoughts are going to influence your behaviors, right? the things that you think influence the things that you do. If you're feeling things, they're going to influence the things that you do. Now, also, you can take it from this area where, like, if you're engaging in behaviors, those behaviors are going to influence your emotions and they're going to influence your thoughts. This is an easy one, right? Because you can set yourself up to have habits where you say, I'm going to, after every online class, I'm going to do 10 push-ups or something. After every online class, I'll do 10 push-ups or something. And then that'll influence the way you think and the way that you do things. I'm going to wake up in the morning, every morning, and I'm going to write 1 page every morning. Just more, just nothing. I'm going to write whatever comes into my mind. Every single morning, I'm going to write that, That can change the way that you think, and it can change the way that you feel. And thoughts are the same. This is why you have, like, mantras. If you always have, words that you say in your mind, those words that you say in your mind can make you have positive feelings, and they can make you do good things, Emotions are a little bit more difficult to control. Normally, you have to grab here or grab here. It's hard to grab here. It's hard to just, I don't know if we even can, to be honest. I think you have to do something in order to change your emotion, or you have to think something in order to change your emotion. But these are 2 controls that we have. It's not that easy to control your thoughts, but it's easy to control your behaviors. You just have to schedule them, and you have to, make them happen. But your behaviors can control your thoughts and your emotions, and so that's probably the easiest place to grab. So this is CBT, and CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's pretty new, and it can be tested a lot better than just simply the talking cure or psychoanalytic approaches. I'm not saying anything bad about psychoanalytic approaches because the research says that they work. Psychoanalytic approaches being Freud's model, right? Where you go into his crazy mythological method, and you come out, a lot of people come out of that okay. And they're like, well, it worked. You can tell me it's not scientific all you want. The results are scientific, and that's people go to do psychoanalysis and then they feel better. What's not scientific about that? It's measurable. But the methods therein are very difficult to measure because it's very mythological. It's like literary criticism. It's a very soft science. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is a different situation. And that's where you're going to try to control your thoughts. You're going to try to control your behaviors. And by doing that, hopefully you're going to experience emotions that you want, like, good ones and not bad ones. Okay. Forensic psychology, yeah, there's people who do this kind of job. The rest of this is all professional, and I did not find it interesting for you guys. So we're going to stop at the end of 1.3, and this is something that you can really apply to yourself, to be honest. So take whatever you like from this, whatever is interesting to you, and write a response. It can be a question where you're saying, you frame some kind of a question that you don't know the answer to yet. You can, but your question should should be obvious that you've already made it to the end of the video here. You've been paying attention the whole time, you should make that obvious. But you don't need to summarize everything. Some people do that when they write these. They summarize everything, and by the end of the course, they seem like they really have gotten a lot out of it. So you can summarize everything. You are not required to. You are not required to summarize everything, right? What I would like for you to do is take the things that I've said, pick one thing that you're interested in, and respond to that. Or just say, lay out something that I explained in your own words, and ask a question at the bottom of it or something. The research says that students don't remember very much, in your life. I don't really care that much if you are really good at my subject in week 15, and then 5 weeks after the class you remember nothing. That's not a success for me as a teacher. What I care about is in a few years if you have taken something away from this class that's going to help your life, right? And the best way to make that happen is for you to just watch these videos, wait for the thing that you already care about, and then you just write about that the way you want to do it, right? So you have a lot of freedom. It's all about you. So you do what you want to do. You write what you want to write, and you will remember that. Like you'll actually keep that. That's the main reason that I do it like this. All right. So I look forward to reading what you write. I look forward to seeing you in the discussion sections in Zoom. And yeah, I think this is going to be an awesome class. This is a new book, and so far it's pretty cool. And so we're going to delve into the realm of psychology, learn to know yourself, and learn to apply a little bit of science in the process. All right. Guys, have a beautiful, beautiful day.